All right, well, we're live on Facebook. Okay, we have some attendees here, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Greetings, everyone, and good evening, and welcome to our virtual Meet the Author featuring Dr. Yanela McLeod and her book, The Miami Times and the Fight for Equality, Race, Sport, and the Black Press, 1948 to 1958. My name is Camila Pritchett, and I am the Operations and Programming Manager at the Black Archives History and Research Foundation of South Florida. Today's program is a part of our Safer at Home virtual series, which we launched at the beginning of the pandemic to present educational and entertaining programming so that people can enjoy and learn at a safe distance. This program is presented in partnership with the Miami Book Fair Online, and Dr. McLeod will be making an appearance there next month. I encourage you all to go to Miami Book Fair Online and sign up for their free sessions. I'm going to give a brief introduction and biography of Dr. McLeod, and then we're going to be having a chat about her book. At the end of the talk, we will take questions and answers from the question and answer section. So if you have any questions throughout our chat, feel free to type them in the Q&A, not in the chat. And if you're watching on Facebook, put them in the comments and we'll address them at the end. Yanela G. McLeod, PhD, strives to elevate social consciousness and improve race relations by sharing important stories related to the African-American experience. McLeod has spent her professional career as an educator, journalist, and social historian, demonstrating the interdisciplinary nature of history and journalism. Her research specialty is the history of the Black press, particularly in Florida. In 2017, she served as editor and facilitated the publishing of the book Agile, Mobile, Hostile, the biography of Alonzo S. Jake Gaither, written by Professor Roosevelt Wilson. She is currently producing a documentary about the legendary football coach. McLeod earned both a PhD in African American history and a master's degree in US history from Florida State University. She is also a graduate of Florida A&M University, where she earned a bachelor's degree in broadcast journalism. She is currently Director of Communications and Alumni Relations for the FAMU College of Social Sciences, Arts, and Humanities, where she is also an adjunct professor of history. McLeod has served as a visiting assistant professor of history at FAMU from 2016 to 2019. And from 2003 to 2014, she served as an assistant professor in the FAMU School of Journalism and Graphic Communications. For 5 years, McLeod was associate editor and senior reporter for the Capital Outlook, a Black-owned newspaper in Tallahassee. A native of the Republic of Panama, McLeod was reared in Elkton, Florida, a small township on the outskirts of historic St. Augustine. She is married to Christopher L. McLeod Sr. and is the mother of Gordon Christopher McLeod, the joy of her life. She is daughter to the late Rosita O'Croney Stringer and the Reverend retired Nathaniel Stringer. She is proud to share siblinghood with her 3 brothers, Lelburn, Alhambra, and Ramon. Welcome. Welcome.
How are you doing? Hello.
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for joining us. I enjoyed reading your book so much. The Black Archives has a long and endearing history with Mr. Reeves and his family, and he and the Miami Times are very near and dear to our hearts. It was just so exciting to go through your presentation of the histories that we've been hearing about in the archives, and also learning about a lot of things that I myself hadn't known about. So since your research focus has been the Black press, and with the Miami Times being the historical giant that it is, it seems natural that you would write your book on this subject. What would you say was the most surprising thing that you learned, either about the Miami Times or the institution of the Black press during this time period that you were researching?
First, let me say thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, let me say thank you to the Black Archives in Miami for inviting me. I really appreciate it, and I'm very grateful for this opportunity. And just being able to share the story about such an important institution as the Black press is near and dear to my heart. The Miami Times came to me as a graduate student at Florida State University when I decided to go there. One of my dear friends and mentors, I think someone's saying that they can't hear me. Can you hear me?
It's a little low.
Okay.
Let's see if we can get you to project a little more.
Okay, let me see.
Okay.
Is that any better?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So I was saying that the Miami Times came to me as a student, a graduate student, when I was at Florida State University. And a dear friend of mine, when she was encouraging me to go to graduate school, she recommended that I study what I know. And I was like, well, what is that? At the time, I had been a reporter for the Capital Outlook newspaper, which is a Black newspaper here. So I decided to study the Black press because of the role that the Black press has historically played in not only the advocacy for civil rights for African Americans and equal rights for African Americans, but also just maintaining justice as it related to the current era. So we started in 1827, but the current era, the Black press has been pivotal. And so in examining the newspapers in Florida, the Miami Times was the oldest newspaper here that had a microfilmed archive. And so it made my research very easy, and it just kind of led me there. And so that speaks to the importance of the preservation of our history and our institutions and our documents, because when people need to turn to them to learn, if they're not available, it makes it tremendously difficult. So the sheer fact that the Miami Times had enough foresight to preserve its pages and have them microfilmed has been a benefit to not only this generation, but generations to come.
And along those lines, in addition to your research using the Miami Times, you also did a lot of your research at the Black Archives here in Miami and in Tallahassee. What can you say to the importance of archives in the communities, the significance to archives to people like you who are looking to bring new life to these histories?
I say that the preservation of our history is essential to our survival, because where our records don't exist, we don't exist, because it is the Black press that has been telling our story. It tells the stories of our births, of our deaths, of our marriages, our graduations, our ups and our downs, the good and the bad. And so it is a historic record. And the same for the archives here on FAMU's campus and the archives in Miami. Just the breadth of the information that you all have painstakingly saved from being thrown away when someone dies, or seeing the value in these documents or these pieces of history that other people just see as something that needs to be out of the way.
Right.
It is so critical to not only our survival, our current survival, but for our children and our generations to know the true and holistic story about the African and African American experience.
Right. because those stories are important, right, for framing how people, the generations that are to come, view the realm of possibility. You know, the person who is telling those stories has the ability to either elevate or diminish the accomplishments of a community. And so I think that archives, as well as you know, scholars such as yourself who take this information and package it in a way so that people who don't physically go to the archives have access to that information and those stories is very important. And speaking of stories, I'm going to pull this picture up and ask you to tell me some stories. I know that you spent some time, you know, interviewing and speaking with Mr. Reeves, the late Garth C. Reeves Sr. before, you know, as you were in the process. So, and I knew Mr. Reeves, and I've spent time speaking to him, and I know you've had some quite interesting conversations, and he was a wealth of information. Can you share one of the most interesting stories that you learned from him sitting around his table getting ready for this book?
There were so many stories. It's so hard. He was just unfiltered truth, and he was hilarious. But I think when I met him in 2010, when I started my research, and I asked him, as a person who lived through, someone who immigrated to this country from the Bahamas, and he was born in 1919. So someone who had seen American history from 1919 until the present, I asked him what was the most astounding thing that he has experienced, because he's going to experience segregation to seeing the first Black president of the United States. And the fact that he and his sister were in the stadium when Jackie Robinson played that first game,
wow,
was the memory that stuck closest to him and meant so much to him, because it was such a critical turning point for African Americans, not only to demonstrate their strength and their excellence, but to help shift the trajectory of this nation. And then right after that one, he did say, seeing President Obama elected. And yes. So I just thought that was heartwarming. You know, he was just an amazing person. Asked him, you know, what was the secret to living? At that time, he was 92, I think, and he's going to live until 100. And he said, you know, he didn't do anything special. He drank good liquor. He said, no cheap stuff, top
shelf only.
Top shelf. And I said, well, whoop, there it is. So,
right.
So he was just, I called him an era. And when we lost him, I said, an era has passed. And he was such a gift to this world.
He was. And how interesting it was that he not only experienced, you know, through age, living through those times changing, but through his work at the Miami Times, he was very much a part of a lot of that change that happened during that time. And in more ways than one, the Reeves men and the Miami Times were a step ahead when it came to dealing with race relations head on, you know, not just reporting on it, but pushing back against it. And your book talks about how some of the other Black publishers shied away from the tone that H.E.S. Reeves used when he would speak out against these things in his editorial approach. Do you think that his tone and forthrightness is what garnered such credibility among the Black community? And do you think the paper would have the same success and longevity had it kind of, you know, told the line a little bit better?
Well, you know, the thing about the Black newspapers throughout the country, depending on what region you were in, it really took a lot of courage to even exist. And so a lot of them had to make way in the environment that they were in their efforts to push for social equality. And so what was interesting about Garth, Henry Reeves, his father, who founded the newspaper in 1923 when he comes to this country from the Bahamas, is he comes from the Bahamas. And in the Bahamas, the Black community in the Bahamas, the Black population is the majority population. And
Mhm.
so they have a very different dynamic and nuance with existing. And even slavery, when it occurred in the Caribbean, you know, the plantation owners would go there for a season and then leave. And so Black people were the majority. So they were able to maintain a sense of identity, to unite in a very different way than African Americans who were in this country, who lived under the watchful eye of
Mhm.
the plantation owner or the overseer. And so his voice was very different because he had a different experience. And so when he came here, what was respected about him was his truth was fair, because where he would admonish the wrongs of a segregated society, he would also require African Americans and Black people in this country to live up to the ideals of their greatness. And so he was just respected from both angles. And because he owned that newspaper, and because Black people are the ones that pushed the financial engine of that newspaper, they supported it with their money. And he didn't have to depend on advertising dollars from white businesses. It was Black businesses.
Mhm.
He was under, his stance was undergirded by a community that supported him. And so when you own it, it really helps to shift and change the dynamic of what you feel comfortable in saying and in speaking to. And so Henry Ethelsberg Sigismunds Reeves was a man unafraid, but he was also very diplomatic, because he had to work with white people in order to move the needle for Black people in Miami.
Right. And now, talk to me a little bit about the background behind the, golf, behind the issue of golf, and how the Times got involved with golf. And, then we'll talk a little bit more about some of the changes that happened based on their involvement.
Okay. So this book is looking at the Miami Times and how the Black press, this particular newspaper, allowed its platform to be used as a communication tool and a strategic tool in order to help tear down segregation in Miami. And they did it on all fronts, by fighting against the Klan, police brutality, trying to call for equal education for Black children. Every facet of Black life was touched by segregation, and the Miami Times was there to remove the facade of Florida being this welcoming paradise, because Florida is the tourism capital of the country at this time.
Mm-hmm.
And they wanted to shed light on what was happening with Black people here. And so the golf course was a status symbol for a lot of whites who came to vacation in Miami. Going to the golf course was what you did. And Miami and Florida was very strategic when they changed their marketing tools. They used to be a part of Old Dixie. And so where you saw the old uncle on the porch in the plantation with these false reminiscent ideals about being Black back on the plantation, they replaced that with like the beaches and the golf courses. Well, at this time, the golf courses were segregated. And Black people could only play on the Miami Springs golf course one day a week on Monday. And this is the day that they use to maintain the course, cut the grass, have the sprinklers on, total
Because most people are working on Monday.
Right. Most people are working on Monday. And when you're playing golf, you don't have sprinklers on you unless you're a golfer.
Right.
Well, these were hardworking men and women who said it is unacceptable that this municipal golf course that's being paid for by our tax dollars is not accessible to us, just like everything else. And so this was just one opportunity for them to take a stand to say that we are not going to allow Miami to disrespect us in this way. And they fought a long fight. It's going to take 10 years to tear down that barrier. But they saw the golf course as an opportunity, or the desegregating the golf course as an opportunity to start moving the line of equality just for the masses. And remember, these are people who were wealthy businessmen, Black elite. They do their deals on the golf course just like the white businessmen did. But they were saying if the average Black person wanted to come on this course and learn to play golf and play golf, the caddies were Black, then they should be able to come on this golf course and play. And so this is going to be a very important case that the newspaper helps to launch.
Mm-hmm.
And it's called the Rice versus Arnold case
Mm-hmm.
of 1948. And it will be the first case that's going to reach the US Supreme Court. And Thurgood Marshall at the time, you see him there in that picture. He's the second on the left. Mr. Garth Reeves is on the first on the left. Thurgood Marshall was attorney Thurgood Marshall at the time. And he saw it as critical to come down to Miami to help advise them on how to make to reach their goal of desegregating the golf course. The man on the far right is G.E. Graves. He was the NAACP attorney in Florida. And then the other man is John D. Johnson. He was an attorney, and he's going to end up being Judge John D. Johnson. And he's, I think he's Florida's second Black judge in the history of the state of Florida.
Yes, he's also the uncle to Black Archives founder, Dr. Dorothy Jenkins Fields.
That's incredible.
Yes. And here are some more headlines. As you said, this was a nearly, decade-long thing. They were going back and forth, and this, it didn't get fixed overnight. And this was against the city. So now, one thing I did not, I didn't really think about Black people playing golf until reading this book, until maybe, the mid 20th century. I wasn't even thinking about, or mid to late, I wasn't even thinking about Black people in golf, honestly, personally, until Tiger Woods, but I knew there were Black ones before then. Right. But what I'm saying is this isn't a part of, this was, even when you learn about Jackie Robinson and everything, it shows even more the protectiveness that was around golf and what that sport kind of was supposed to be for the rich white people. It just never trickled down, because some of those images in your book show children, playing golf. And right. I just found it really interesting to see how much that was a part of the culture among Blacks, especially Blacks who were of, means.
Anytime African Americans had the opportunity to be exposed to something, just like anybody else, we participated in it. Like I said, the caddies were Black. The people who manicured the golf greens were Black. So they were around it all the time. And the children were the initial caddies. And so seeing the game, they would sneak when the course was closed, and they would play. I mean, we know that the inventor of the golf tee was a Black man. And so Black people have used every opportunity they could to try and live a life of full humanity in whatever venue or whatever environment that they were in.
And reading about the case that Thurgood Marshall was involved in, and also, well, in reading your book, it talks about how, again, these things that were happening in Miami were kind of just ahead of the curve and things that were happening later on, because you saw about a decade later when other cities, Houston, was it Michigan? That brought forth similar anti-discrimination lawsuits for, public areas. So it kind of made me think about, the relationship, not just with press, but with sport and recreation, and how that, kind of today, we're not dealing with the overt discrimination that perhaps even Black athletes, even Jackie Robinson would have to face when he travels somewhere. Obviously we're not having those same situations with our athletes now, but it comes out when they speak out against social injustice, with the shut up and dribble, and Colin Kaepernick basically being blackballed from the NFL. Recently, they had the NBA boycott for a few games, which kind of then spawned all different sports leagues to cancel or postpone games during that week in solidarity. What do you think about the way that activism is expressed now, or the motivations behind, or the way that it comes across, or what gets accomplished versus what was happening, you know, during the time that you were speaking of in the book?
Well, you know, I think about the one thing that stood out to me with the newspaper was the strategy, the behind the scenes strategic maneuvers that institutions used in order to grasp equality for African Americans, social equality. And so I tell my students all the time, I teach at Florida A&M University, and I am a rattler myself. And I tell my students that the history of African and African American people in this country it can be a daunting one. It's a heavy one. And but it's full of a lot of obstacles and trials and tribulations and oppression, but it's also full of a lot of triumphs and strength and courage. And I tell them, if you look at our history, the one thing that you see is constant in our progression is that we worked together. We worked together. And so people like Mr. Reeves and our forefathers and our foremothers, they did not have someone at the table. They didn't have someone at the table. And so they had to fight to get a seat at the table. And in many cases, they made their own table. Right. But today, we've got so many people at the table in so many different areas. But what I think is lacking is a collective courage and a collective strategy. And what I think you saw demonstrated with those athletes was they harnessed their collective power, and they came together and did not let someone, unlike Colin Kaepernick initially, he was just out there on his own. Right. But after they got over the shock of the institutional racism that is here in 2020, right? And they're saying, I thought that was in the history books. I think somewhere along the lines, behind the scenes, they really saw this is real, and what can we do? How can we harness our economic power and our voices to make things happen? And so that's what you see with the Black press in this picture here. And I think about Ice Cube. Don't let me forget mentioning him.
Oh, we're going to talk about him.
That's what's happening with Ice Cube. Ice Cube, no one person, lone man or woman, can fight the cause for Black people in this country. Right. And so the issue, one of the problems he's facing is he's isolated. He's by himself versus a group or a contingent of music moguls or whatever, because he's in media, entertainment moguls, coming together as a collective and saying, if you don't do these things, we are going to tell our people to do these things, right? And they're exercising their power. So that's one of the issues. But if you see in this picture, this is in 1972, and it's just one example. That's Garth Reeves sitting right next to President Nixon. Right. And Garth Reeves is there with the contingent of the Black press publishers, the National Newspaper Publisher Association. And from the time they have been able to get a seat at the table, by making their way at the table, they called the presidents and said, we need to talk to you about our people. And we need to talk to you about what we demand and what we want, whether that president was Democratic or Republican, because to be honest with you, none of them are friends when we're talking about African-American progress in a real systemic way. So you kind of have to move their hands. But that is what I learned about this story and the Black press is the collective power and strategy is what helped move the needle when it comes to African and African-American progress in this country.
Okay. Now, do you want to talk a little bit more about Ice Cube since we put it out there?
Yeah, I mean, the brother's heart is in the right place. And what he's saying is he's tired of one political party, the Democratic Party, he feels like is taking the Black vote for granted. Right. That was the same thing when it was flipped. Black people used to vote largely Republican before the principles of the parties changed. Right. That's going to change in the 1930s with Franklin Delano Roosevelt running. And it's because the Black publishers told the Republicans at the time, We're not going to let you manipulate us. You have to work for our vote just like everybody else. And they got a seat at the table with FDR and told them what they wanted and what they needed, and he was delivering. And so they said, we'll tell our people to vote for you. And they endorsed him, and he won. And so when Black people come together individually, without, wherever the institutions are, we're typically out percentage-wise numbered. But when we come together, then we have some power. And so what I say about Ice Cube is, the strategy has to be collective, and the people have to be behind the scenes thinking about not hoping and waiting on being reactive, but being proactive on what is our plan, regardless of who sits in that chair on November 4th. What's our plan if Biden is president? What's our plan if Trump is president? Because African Americans, we have to change our condition, because a large segment of our people, their conditions don't change regardless of who's in that seat. And so what I'm saying is, where is the Black caucus? Where is their voice in all of this? Where is the Black press's voice in all of this? Where are the Black entertainment professionals in all of this as a collective?
Right, because it gets politicized. And then also now you have social media.
Right.
So it's not always the think tank that is putting forth their thoughts, opinions, and ideas. And there gets to be so much noise surrounding these issues that it's hard to get to the core, to, that it's already denounced before it's even out, because somebody leaked it on Twitter with a whole commentary in their opinion, or
Right.
because Trump tweeted it, So social media, that's a whole different realm that goes down a whole nother way. But you were talking about today, the media. We mentioned before how when H.E.S. Reeves started the Miami Times, and when he was maneuvering these difficult conversations publicly that he was having with the community about what was going on, a lot of what allowed him to do that was freedom from, having to answer to anyone. And, as a journalist as well as an academic, that the advertisers and the, having to appease the advertisers and knowing how swift cancel culture can come in. And it's been so prevalent surrounding a lot of these issues, these so-called sensitive issues. How do you feel that the Black press has evolved or devolved when it comes to addressing civil rights and social justice issues?
I think because of the sacrifice, the blood of our ancestors, and I'm talking about people in the 50s and the 60s when I say ancestors, because of their sacrifice, today's Black press doesn't have to fight the same fight. Mm-hmm. But what is imperative is that we don't fall asleep at the wheel. And if they use the Black press as an entrepreneurial institution only, a vehicle to make money, it is not living up to its legacy. And so you still see a lot of these Black newspapers that have the old guard in them. And when I say the old guard, I mean either the publishers themselves who mm-hmm. started them are still at the helm, or their children have decided, or some heir has decided to continue that fight. And so what I'm saying is the Black press today has to keep our nose to the ground, and we have to stay on the radar. And what we do is show the stories where the injustices are, where you're not seeing them in the main press, right? And so every year, just like the Capital Outlook when I worked there, and the Miami Times and countless others, every year, Mr. Reeves, H.E.S. Reeves, used to publish the plan for the Black community, what the Black community wanted for the next year, and what they were holding elected officials accountable for, and what they demanded as citizens of Miami. That was published every year. And every year they published their accomplishments. And every year they endorsed candidates, some Democratic, some Republican. So they had their hands, and they were the pulse of the community. They were the heartbeat of the community, because that's the communication tool. They could incite Black people. They could influence public opinion. And so that responsibility still exists today. We just have to be vigilant in seeing these issues, because what's key to the Black newspapers and what you see is we are the ones who are telling our stories and telling them in a holistic manner and talking about what was important and necessary in our community. You did not see that in the mainstream press. All you saw was the criminal reports or negative stereotypes being eschewed by, being influenced and perpetuated. In the Black press, we told the good, the bad, and the ugly, but it was our goal to make sure that we let the community know what issues are out there. And so people could align with this newspaper because they said, they're talking about education. They're talking about my school and the resources we need. They're talking about the unfair housing laws that are crippling our once thriving Black communities. So we kept that dialogue. We were in front of it. We cannot lose ground, because if you look at the news today, if you just put those pictures in black and white, I was looking at a video by Black Eyed Peas and Jennifer Hudson today. In those images, they were black and white. And Camilla, it looked like images from the 1950s and 60s, but this was just 3 months ago. And so if the Black press falls down on our birthright and our responsibility, we are going to jeopardize the lives of millions of people, because there's no one there telling our story like we can.
And then on top of that, now we have this extreme proliferation of fake news, accusations of fake news. If you don't have Black press, if you don't have Black news or somewhere from your community that you can trust, then you're really out there just going along with the narrative, because that's what happened before. They want you to hear the story as they want it to be told. And what do you think about this whole fake news idea? Do you think that fake news is damaging to the institution of journalism in general, and how do you think that it's touching Black press? Do you think that it's that the whole disillusionment that people are getting with the media in general is just the mainstream media, or do you think that's impacting Black press as well?
The first thing, when I hear the term fake news, I think of Trump. So to me, it's not even a valid colloquialism, because we're smarter than that. I mean, I think people know what they're reading and they know their sources. And I mean, sometimes things can just be ridiculous. But when we hear the term fake news today, which is it derived from this president, it's all about removing or diluting the reputation of the media. And the media, the freedom of the press is in the First Amendment for a reason. And so what the Black press has historically done was made sure that Black people's freedom was involved in that public discourse. From the time we were established in 1827 with Freedom's Journal, when they were calling for the abolition of slavery in the South. And so, some of this, I think people are smarter than what we give them credit for when we talk about fake news. And that's just a way to discredit the truth that's being told about people who are in leadership.
Right. Let's see, I have a couple other pictures here. I think I put up the picture of Mr. Reeves and Mr. Johnson.
Oh, yes. Ebony Magazine.
Yes. As we were talking about other Black press. Let's go here.
There he is, John H. Johnson.
John H. Johnson.
Yes, Ebony He starts out with Sapien magazine, and he started out putting together a little booklet for an insurance company. And from that, his idea grew to say, you know what? The only stories we hear about Black people is of oppression. We don't hear the stories of Black people's triumph, their wealth, going to college, the professionals. And so he thought if he could create a medium that showed Black people thriving and succeeding, that would help change the psychological landscape of Black people during his time, who all they saw was just the heaviness of being Black.
Right.
And he does. And though that publication comes in and does a tremendous shift for Black people, and helps to elevate our pride. And the other thing I wanted to mention about salvaging, when you're talking about the archives, this happens every day in our homes. When our aunts and our cousins and our moms save pictures and newspaper clippings or the funeral program, all of that is a way to try to hold on to the history, to pass it on to the next generation. It has to be contingent upon that generation to take that torch, because we're talking about the Black press in a large narrative of civil rights, but in your home, the history of your family, the legacy and the triumph of your family is powerful. It's equally as important, and the younger generation has to see value in it.
Mm-hmm.
That's Mr. Reeves and his daughter.
Speaking of legacy.
Yes. And what I love about Rachel Reeves, we lost her of September of last year, and then her father I think in November of last year. Yes. But Rachel Reeves was Garth Reeves' only daughter. He had two children, a junior and then Rachel. And he was grooming, they're the Bahamians, and Bahamians believe in the son and the birthright, our West Indian people. I come from Panama. And he was grooming Garth Jr. to take over the paper. But unfortunately, Garth Jr. got ill with colon cancer, and he died at a very young age, 30 or 31. Mm-hmm. So he was looking for someone to train for the paper. And Rachel said, what am I, chopped liver? And so, so the gender component of the Black press cannot be ignored, because a lot of times these newspapers are created by families. And there is the husband and the wife and the children are all a part of making it happen. And Mr. Reeves' mother, I said, we haven't done enough research on his mother, but his mother was a very strong-minded woman who taught him courage. And Rachel possessed that same kind of DNA of her grandmother. So she steps in and she becomes publisher of the newspaper and blows her pop's mind. He was like, she just took it to a whole other level. She's going to usher it in to the 20th century. And now her son is at the head. But the voice and the nuance of women who have started Black newspapers, who have used the Black press as a tool to fight for social justice. My shero is Ida B. Wells, who carried a pistol on each hip, who fought and used her life campaigning against lynching of Black people, and her newspaper, the Memphis Free Speech and Headlight. So the dynamics of gender and women cannot be left out and excluded. And actually, that's one of the next projects I want to work on, is the women of the Black press.
Okay. Well, I see you addressed the answer. Were you addressing Yawande's comment? And all right.
Yes, so your picture with Rachel was perfect timing.
Perfect time, right? And so we hit on the legacy of the paper, and we also touched on women. Let me see. Now, before we go to the other quick Q&A, let's talk about voting.
Okay.
It's right here. We're right in the middle of all the dueling ads, and everything is at stake. So we've been seeing voter suppression in various iterations since the history of elections in this country. And the more contemporary methods right now are the reduced polling locations, ballot boxes, and reduced ballot boxes, and changing people's polling station to somewhere way far out, that's difficult to get to. And now on top of those things that were already happening, we have COVID, right, that is impacting Black and brown people at a much higher rate than anyone else. And so you have these long lines where people are standing in close proximity, and everybody is trying to navigate, their fear of this disease, in addition to exercising their right, wanting to exercise their right to vote. What are your thoughts on these issues, the voter suppression issues, and how they've impacted Black communities historically and today?
This is a part of the legacy of America. And we're talking about long voter lines and being cautious with COVID. My father, our mothers and fathers, they risked their lives to vote, literally their lives. There would be Klan at the polls with guns, daring them to vote. And so, there is this kind of this commentary that's going around that kind of rubbed me the wrong way when I keep hearing people saying that African Americans voting is going to be the tipping point for the outcome that they want, right? And so if Black people don't vote, Trump's gonna win. If Black people do vote, Biden will win. And I'm telling you, we absolutely have to vote, because that's a part of our power. And if we vote in a collective block, not just politically, but economically, the economics of our voting power is really what changes things.
Right.
But for a country that has perpetually had its foot on the neck of Black men and women when it came to voting, to tell Black men and women that if you don't vote, the outcome that we want won't happen and it's your fault.
Right.
I take issue with that, because Black people have voted when it was a life or death exercise. We looked at the 1920 election massacre in Ocoee, 56 people dead, poll workers who refused to take Black people's ballots, the Klan who stood at the polls and told them, you cannot go in, all because one man tried to vote. And I say Black people have voted in spite of those pediments. The same as today. We know the power. We know our responsibility. And if you look in those lines, you see people of all races and all genders trying to exercise their right to vote. And when we get people who are in the race, who speak directly to the condition of the folk whose vote they want, that's when you see people go to the polls.
Right.
And so I refuse to let America tell me that Black people are not voting.
Right.
We are voting, and that is a part of our legacy. Now, we have some younger people who may be apathetic, because that's part of the nature of the generation today. They've been given a lot. They have not seen a lot of obstacles. Right. That's up to us to educate them and inform them and take them to the polls.
Right. Right. All right. So we have, before I go into some of the Q&A, are there any other things about the book that you'd like to share that we have not touched on?
No, I just think one thing I tried to do is, it's focusing on golf in this case, but I tried to show little snippets of all aspects of Black life that this newspaper was trying to help protect and to help advance. And these were men and women who were civic leaders. They were civic servants. They served on a number of boards. Garth Reeves was on the board of the first integrated bank in Florida. He owned a bank. He was a part share owner of a bank. His father was on the board of the Children's Hospital. But the thing is, these were institutions that met the social needs of their community. So they had a baseball team. They had a theater program where they would enable kids to go see the movies. They did all these types of things. A part of the parent teacher organization, the PTO. But I tried to, anytime I ran across a name, even if I did not know the name of the person, I tried to put it in this book, because somebody in Miami might open that book and say, oh, that's Auntie Ruth. Because that's a part of preserving our history and our legacy. There are so many names you'll never hear, but they were right there on the front lines. And so you will see, even in the appendix, I just list a bunch of names of people and their occupations, because it's so important to know the people at the local level who are making a difference in everyday life, in people's everyday life.
Yes, I agree very much. And that's something that at the Black Archives, I see on a day-to-day basis. I'm always discovering some new local giant that, they're not always exalted to the same level that the national leaders get. But just like with elections, a lot more of your day-to-day life is impacted by those serving locally. And that's the same thing with those local civic leaders. Those are the people who are impacting where you're going to play golf that weekend. Those are the people who are changing which door you walk into the restaurant. And so I think it is very important to keep those names alive, and also their stories alive, so people understand that everybody who makes an impact is not so unattainable and unreachable like your Dr. Martin Luther Kings and things like that, where they just seem to be like a mystical person. They were people who attended your church, or who, were principals of your school. The things that they were doing to help enrich their community were very important and much worth noting and putting a bookmark in history.
One of the things that
Go ahead.
Capital Outlook, when Professor Roosevelt Wilson and his wife Kathy Wilson owned the newspaper, before they sold it in the late 1990s, 2009, because of they retired. But one of the things that was so valuable, and people called it the cheat sheet, was the Capital Outlook would go through all of those amendments and ballot initiatives, and we would interview every candidate regardless of party, and we would endorse candidates and publish the ballot, right? With what we were recommending. And people would take that newspaper into that polling place, into that voting booth with them, because they trusted Roosevelt Wilson. Even if they hadn't read a thing about Initiative 1 or whatever it is, if Roosevelt Wilson said, this is what we should vote for, this is who we should not vote for, they trusted him, because he proved himself day in and day out in his community with his courage and the power of his voice and his pen. And so that's the standard that today's Black press is required at which to operate. People have to trust you. And just because it's Black does not mean it's trustworthy. Right. We see that on the Supreme Court. We saw that with Breonna Taylor. I mean, you just name it. So Black people aren't dumb by a long shot. And when you prove yourself in our community with the truth, we're going to back it up. We're going to support it.
Right. Now, staying on with questions about Black press, we have another one, two that are similar, talking about the future of Black publications. What do you think the Miami Times did differently to remain sustainable when other publications folded? And then also, how do you envision the future of other Black publications struggling to stay afloat financially?
Right. So a couple of things. The Black press has always shifted, be it because of the technology of the time, the changing landscape of politics, because they knew how to survive and they had a community that supported them. One of the reasons we lost a lot of Black newspapers is because of terrorism. A lot of them were burned and destroyed by people who subscribe to white supremacy and racist values. And so those who were able to sustain themselves, they did it by every hook that they could. And so with the Black press and with the Miami Times, it had a couple of things in its favor, but the majority of these newspapers are family owned, and they apprenticed their children. And so the children either wanted to take it on and they took it on, or they did it because of responsibility, a role that they felt. We don't have the luxury of that today. Our children have so many options that a lot of them feel like that's not my passion, I'm done with it. And unfortunately, our newspapers close if there's not someone who has the same passion for it. With the Miami Times, he had Rachel. First of all, H.E.S. had Garth, then Garth had Rachel. And now Rachel has her son, Garth B. Reeves. And what I think is it's an opportunity to harness the innovation and the creativity of this generation in order to see how they take it to the next level when it comes to social media, when it comes to using technology like apps. But someone has to value it and has to care about it within that niche. And if they don't, they've got to find some kind of way to make sure that that legacy continues and sustains itself. And so we just have to be creative and tap into our instinct of survival that is a part of our culture.
So it's really about stewardship,
It is about
like with anything else.
That's
being
absolutely right.
Someone who finds it important enough to hold it guarded, make sure that it's protected and perpetuated.
Right. And we have to value it. We can't look for other people to value it. And also, a lot of these men and women were shrewd businessmen and women. And so when you're going to turn it over, a lot of them turned it over with the financial resources to keep it up. But Black newspapers do depend on Black consumer support. And the Black businesses, or any business, the Capital Outlook had grocery ads and all kinds of things because our voice, Mr. Wilson's voice, was a voice of truth, and people can get behind that regardless of what color. And so you have to have something worthwhile that people want to protect and to maintain. And you've got to be able to pass it on with resources.
Now, another question, can you discuss and share some quick thoughts on how the Black press has, or must reinvent itself in order to survive and thrive in modern day virtual and future domains, especially the STEM areas?
They have to talk about the current issues that are affecting the community and affecting our generations today. And they have to be they have to be controlling that narrative ahead of it. Don't wait for other people to tell us what's important. The Black press was behind the scenes talking to all of the policy brokers and advocating for Black people, be it at the educational level. The Capital Outlook sits in Tallahassee, the capital of Florida. And Professor Wilson was a professor at Florida A&M University in the School of Journalism and Graphic Arts then, graphic communication now. When I tell you behind the scenes, I saw him meet with so many people, the governors included, the state legislators, the school board, about protecting Florida A&M University. And he was always paying attention to what policies were coming out that might negatively impact FAMU. This is stuff the general public didn't know about. And once he got his hands around it and understood it, he would take it to the public. And the public would rally behind FAMU to protect it. That's the model that we have to maintain in order for our institutions and our communities to survive. So the Black press on social media, or in today's time, they have to talk about what matters to people. Whether the people are asking for it or not, they have to talk about it. If it's just fluff, it's of no value and of no merit. And so they're looking for people to tell them what's happening, what should I care about, what should I be in the know about. And the other thing too is the Black press on social media has to think beyond the boundaries of America. The internet has taken our reach international, and where we can connect with communities of color or communities where people are oppressed throughout the world, that builds its readership. And so that's an opportunity there to expand our reach and to maintain our longevity.
All right. I have another question from Timothy Barber. The Miami Times gave a platform to many first-time writers. In your research, did you uncover any unsung heroes that came out of the Miami Times?
Absolutely. And unfortunately, I don't have the names in my head, but I can tell you the man who was the sports writer, He was like an intern, and he goes on to be one of the most well-known Black sports writers and columnists in the country, because his column gets published in Black newspapers throughout the country, the Pittsburgh Courier, the Chicago Defender. Tim, some of the people in college, like he may be a local name, but Eluster Richardson here in Tallahassee, he's an incredible artist. He started as an artist and a graphic designer at the Capital Outlook, and now he's a world-renowned artist. And our history shows it. Zora Neale Hurston, she gets her start at the Black press. James Baldwin, he's going to get his start at the Black press, because this is a place, a safe place where they could go and feel that they could share what was going on in their mind and in their hearts and in their passion about their people. And it be a platform that didn't water it down, and that it would be a platform that would share it. And so, you know, the James Baldwins of the times, the Zora Neale Hurstons, and many others, they get their start in the Black press. Some of our most acclaimed artists are going to come out of the Black press. Our photographers, Gordon Parks is going to start in the Black press, and the legacy goes on and on.
All right. Now, what advice would you give to young women entering the field of journalism today?
To know that you belong, you have a voice. The gender issue is going to be an issue if you let it be an issue. Our race issue is going to be an issue if we let it be an issue. You have to walk in with courage, you have to walk in with tenacity, and you have to walk in with a vision and to know what your voice is. If you go in without having a strong sense of identity, it's going to be very easy for your self-esteem to be damaged, and for your voice to be hampered. You know, I by no means went into journalism on a national level, but just the smallest things at Florida A&M University when I was a journalism student. And I learned that if you were in front of the camera, they could dictate to you how you wore your hair, if you needed to narrow your nose, if you needed to lighten your skin. And I just wasn't about that. I was like, y'all can have it. And so I didn't have the temperament for it. But there are some young ladies who they have the temperament for it because they have a vision to go in and tear down that obstacle. And so if you look across journalism today and broadcast news today, you will see more Black women wearing their natural hair on television. And it seems like something so simple and minute. But when we talk about the legacy and the history of our hair, Black women's hair, and all we've had to go through to even think that it was beautiful, that's a tremendous front that they are tearing down. So if you have that vision, go for it. If you don't know who you are in for a world of trouble. And so I would recommend that you really check your identity, your self-esteem, and your purpose before making that move.
And also in the digital age, another cool thing is, you know, with the social media and being able to create platforms for yourself. Absolutely. If you know who you are and you're finding whatever markets you're going to don't want who you are to represent them, you create your own platform. There are these kids that are, you know, starting out making podcasts and YouTube channels and interviewing people and building up their own platform to the point where the same people who may have turned them down before can't deny their 50,000, you know, or 100,000 followers. Right. And now they've kind of written their own path. So I think that there's also a lot more avenues than, you know, when we were younger going to school to break into journalism, because journalism is a lot more broad than it had been before. Yes. Than just, you know, print or broadcast.
And that spills over into society. And I want to, the young people today, it's really hard. Sometimes it's easy to just kind of, they don't know what they want and cast them aside. No, when we look at the Black Lives Matter movement, they reinvigorated the civil rights movement. We call it the social justice movement, but those young people have been on the front lines since the first Black man was killed unnecessarily by a white police officer. And that was something that sparked in them, and they joined from all over the world. So social media, when it comes to advocating for African Americans, Black people in this country, social media has been a tremendous platform that the younger generation has taken hold of, shaped it into what it is becoming. They are the ones who've created this. And if we look to that, that is the Black press. The social media arm is the Black press. And these young folk are doing tremendous things as it relates to moving progress and moving the needle forward for Black people.
And like you said, reaching outside of the boundaries of the United States, because just like the other day when they had the big, the shooting of all the protesters in Nigeria, and within hours, it was all over social media. People who would not normally have even been tuned into what's going on that side of the world, because you now know all of the actors and actresses and performers who are of Nigerian descent, and they're sharing it. And then you see other media, online media outlets sharing it. So it also opens your eyes up to the condition of other Black people in other places outside of what we're dealing with.
Right.
But also, back to the beginning of your book, when you talked about why they switched up the marketing for tourism, is that because the world is a lot smaller now and people still want to make sure they look a certain kind of way, that idea of being able to see you from all the way over there, people in other countries talking about how crazy, what's going on in the United States is, when they saw that video, it puts a stain on, the land of milk and honey that they try to perpetuate to other people.
That's right. That's right. The civil rights movement was as successful as it was because television was the media of the day. So people could see and hear the atrocities that were being imposed on Black people in this country. And that had an economic impact on America's international business relationships. The same today. If the Black press does nothing today but call for a sense of unity and collective thinking and strategy among African American people at every stage of life, at every economic level of life, you would see our condition change, really change, when it comes to the economic situation that we see as a whole with our community, and the tearing down of systemic racism. I mean, it's there. That's the legacy of slavery, is systemic racism in everything. And we've been trying to jump that hurdle every year of our lives.
Right. And now it's televised. So it's not just folklore, it's not just something that doesn't exist anymore. It is in front of your face.
It's here on this phone, instantaneous. That's how we know about the people who are getting shot. It's somebody with the phone like this. You know what I mean? And so a movement can be ignited in a second. We just have to be ready. And that's why I say again, what is the Black press saying about our plan? What's the plan for November 4th for President Joe Biden? What's the plan on November 4th for President Trump? Whoever's in that seat, we have to dictate how we're going to use our power to move ourselves forward.
Right. Very well said. All right. Well, we're at a little over an hour. I do have one other question. Vanessa Byers wants to know where you can get your book.
That's my FAMU friend.
And this book is available on Amazon, correct?
Yes.
Right, so you can purchase the book on Amazon. And Dr. McLeod, can you share what your social media is if people wanted to connect with you on social media?
Yes, so it is Yanela. Well, my name is spelled Yanela, and you'll see Mio, M-I-O, McLeod. Mio's my nickname, my family name. And so that's me on Facebook, and Yanela McLeod on Instagram. And so you'll see that on all my platforms. It'll connect.
And if you follow the Black Archives, the posts that we've posted on Instagram and Facebook have Dr. McLeod tagged, so you can find her that way as well.
I was very happy to be able to give this book to Garth Reeves for his 100th birthday, and he signed it for me, and he said, to my favorite author. And for me, that meant a lot because it was something that solidified his legacy for him, and his father and his mother and his family's legacy, that their story is not lost. Right. And so I was grateful to be able to help do that. And it wasn't the intention, but that's what it became.
It was perfect that you got that everything, and he got to see it. And, you know, I think that it's great for not only, you know, to encapsulate their story, but also to encourage the future generations, to encourage those future organizers, those future people who are going to strategize and are going to bring it to the table and make things happen, to let them know these are, you know, the shoulders that you're standing on. And I think it's a great tool, a great teaching tool. I think that, you know, schools should have it. People in Miami don't know enough about Miami history. I see that all the time when students visit the Black Archives. But I think that having something like this is a great tool for students and people. Let's see.
Yeah, and I want to thank Dr. Dorothy Fields for her work in preserving the African-American, I say the Black history, because it's Black people from all over the world in Miami, right, and everywhere, of Miami. And that I learned she started the Black Archives in Miami as a volunteer, and look at what it has become today. And with Timothy Barber and yourself, there's a generation that has taken on that torch. And the same here with the Black Archives, the Meek Eaton Black Archives here on Florida A&M University's campus. Not only does it preserve FAMU's history, but the history of Black people in Florida and beyond. And that was the precious jewel of James N. Eaton, and who got the political and financial support from U.S. representatives, Senator Carrie P. Meeks. It's the Carrie P. Meeks, James N. Eaton Black Archives. But Merle Dawson, she's going to take that torch. James Eaton trained her, and she takes that torch and she brings that museum and that archives into the next generation. And so there is another generation that has to take these torches. And if we don't hold up the banner, our history is going to be lost.
Now, I know that, let's go back to this. Tim just asked, we talked about this picture. I don't know if he had joined the group, but if you want to talk again about where you got this picture from, these pictures that you have on the cover of the book.
Yes, and so the Miami Times from the microfilm, those pictures, they're shots of the newspaper articles, but also Florida Memory has this photo with Mr. Reeves, attorney, then attorney Marshall, who goes on to be judge, Chief Justice Thurgood Marshall, and G.E. Graves, who was the attorney for the NAACP, and John D. Johnson, who was an attorney who's going to become a judge. And it comes out of the archives, you know, and if they weren't there, you know, we would not know this history. And they're in the X-ray building of, I think Miss Fields' family member owned it then, but it was a medical facility. And so again, Black people in Miami, in Overtown, which was then called Colortown, they had doctors' offices, banks, newspapers, clinics, boutiques, all that kind of stuff. And they sustained our community because of the economic power. And that's a historic building in itself.
And that X-ray clinic is owned by the Black Archives, the S.H. Johnson X-ray clinic.
That's right. And so see, the Black Archives is acquiring real estate that would just be torn down. And, you know, our buildings are a part of our legacy as well.
Yes.
A very powerful picture, because every last one of those people, they were at the prime, the beginning of their career. And look where it took them.
All right. So thank you so much. I really enjoyed our conversation. I think that your book is very special. I hope everybody can join you for your appearance during the book fair. And the Miami Book Fair 2020 is from November 15th to the 22nd, and they can go to miamibookfair.com to find the schedule for all of those things happening. The book, as I mentioned, can be purchased on Amazon.com. And if you would like to catch up on any of the programs from our Safer at Home virtual series, you can find them along with the recording of tonight's event on our YouTube page. If you would like to support the Black Archives, you can do so by becoming a member or by contributing to our endowment fund, which was established at the wishes of Mr. Reeves, who was a board member of the Black Archives until his death. Donors to the endowment fund who make a gift of $5,000 or greater will have their names listed on the Garth C. Reeves Wall of Distinction, which is located in the administrative lobby of the Black Archives Historic Lyric Theater. So all of our information for following us on social media and contacting us about donors included here on this slide. And I think that's it. Dr. McLeod, do you have any parting words?
I just want to say thank you again for the opportunity to share with the community about this book. And I would encourage anyone who just wants to learn about Miami history, because a lot of Dr. Field's research is in here because she did the research. She made the path easier for me. But just to know about your communities, this is focusing on the golf case and how the newspaper was strategically used to tear down desegregation in public golf courses. It's going to set a precedent, but it's a history that you all should be proud of, that we all should be proud of. And I'm glad that I had the opportunity to do it. And before I leave, I want to say hello to my very supportive and I think patient husband. Some days I think patient husband, Christopher McLeod, and my sweet, sweet baby boy, who just keeps growing up on me every day. Hi, Gordon. Mommy loves you. And thank you.
Hi, husband and baby.
Yeah. He's 5. He's going to kill me that I called him a baby. But,
he's going to be forever your baby.
Ever. So I thank everybody who just came out to support. I really appreciate it. And I'm just very grateful for the opportunity to do the research, to tell the story. And like you mentioned, Coach Gaither is another project I'm working on. There are so many stories for us to tell. We do need the economics to be able to do it. Raising the money and having the access to the capital to tell these stories is a challenge, but we can't let it stop us.
Right, right. That's true. And as Timothy Barber, our executive director, likes to say, until the lion tells his story, tales of the hunt will glorify the hunter. Hey. So I appreciate you for being one of those lions out there telling our story.
Thank you. Timothy Barber's a rattler. So, we learn well on the hill.
Thank you so much for joining us. You have a great night, and everybody's going to be watching you at the book fair next month and following you on social media to keep up with you and when your documentary comes out.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye.